Hello and welcome back to the lecture on government budgets and fiscal policy. And now that we've seen how total expenditure on domestic production can be broken down into these three categories of consumption by households, investment by private businesses, government spending, plus the demand for exports and the demand for imports. And we've seen how fiscal policy relates to that through government spending and through taxation, which works via consumption. Once we've seen that, now we can look at these three different macroeconomic models that I'm going to be presenting, starting with the simplest of them, which is called the Keynesian Cross. And as I said, it's based very heavily on the idea of John Maynard Keynes. So broadly speaking, it's Keynesian macroeconomics. And as well as his initial idea of looking at the evidence or statistics by putting all demand into those five categories, he also got some ideas of how these things relate together. So we're looking at a national level, how does total output, total income, total expenditure, how do these relate to each other? Well, the first insight is that total output has got to be the same as total income, because everything that is spent by one person goes to someone else in the economy, once you take into account of the exports and imports, as the equation does. The next one is that the total that people decide to spend in the year must be equal to the total income that people receive, for a similar argument. And then the first equation then is this one of planned expenditure. Yeah. Now, here we're assuming that total planned expenditure is all that private households want to consume, plus everything that firms need to buy to carry on with their business, plus everything that the government wants to spend. And we also assume, and this is a slightly different type of assumption, this is almost must be true because of accounting, these things must add up. This is a behavioural assumption. Behaviourally, we assume that the more that income grows, the more people will want to consume. Now, if you've noted, this equation looks much simpler than the one I presented before. It's because we're also assuming, just for now, that there's no trade at all, and that interest rates stay the same, and the prices don't change. Now, of course, in the real world, all of these assumptions are totally ridiculous. So we start with the assumptions just to get a simple picture of how things work, and then we gradually drop the assumptions to get a more realistic picture. But these are the assumptions for now. So now we come to the first of our theoretical models. This one's known as the Keynesian Cross model. I really put some of those assumptions into a diagram. So along the horizontal axis here, we're showing that income and output are the same, or we call that Y at a national level. So all the money that people get is the same as the value of output, because all the income you receive is because of stuff that's produced. On the vertical axis, you're showing expenditure. Well, that shows, given the amount of income and output you receive, how much are you then going to spend from that? All these points here, if you draw a 45-degree line, these are the points where income is equal to expenditure. So this is the same as this. And ultimately, expenditure must be equal to income, because in a closed economy, the expenditure can't go anywhere else. So this one's the one that logically must be true. You must be on this red line, because all of expenditure must equal all of output. Here's the one which is the assumption, which is we assume that as income and output rise, people want to spend more, so C increases. So this diagram here is showing that the expenditure is equal to investment, which is taken in this very simple model as just a fixed amount, where it doesn't depend on income and output. Companies just decide, okay, this is what we're going to invest in our business this year. Governments, for political reasons, decide, okay, this is how much we're going to spend this year. Whereas consumers base this decision on how much income they're receiving, which depends on how much output is produced. So the more income they get, the more they consume, which is why this line rises up. If it just depended on I and G, it would be a flat line. but C is the thing that's making it go upwards. This is measuring the slope of the line, and really this 1 is not ready to scale if that's the total income in a country, but they're saying that if you had one more unit, so one more yen or one more rupee or whatever it is, how much more would people consume based on that? And the more people would consume when they got one more units of income, the steeper the line's going to be. And the blue line shows all the points where the amount of expenditure is what people want to spend given that level of output. Then of course you put this together with this and you get that, which is showing you there's only one points where output and expenditure are in equilibrium. And the idea is that if you were at a point where there was no equilibrium, then people would be with this much cash or this much income, more precisely, people would only want to spend this much, but in actual fact that's not as much as total expenditure would need to be in order for total expenditure to be the same as total income, which means that some production would go unsold. So things will be sitting on shelves unsold, and in the language here, if firms are having cars, building car lots, or the stuff that's not sold, in effect they're being forced to invest because they're building up their stock, so the expenditure would increase. Yeah? So that would take this line up, so it would match up to this line. Yeah? So the only place where equilibrium is here. This is where you first start to use this to analyse what happens with policy. This is a simple increase in government spending. So the government, for some political reason, so maybe to reduce unemployment or to boost the economy after an outbreak of coronavirus, for example, they decide to boost government spending. And in economics, if you haven't already met this, we use this symbol to mean an actual change in something. So G is the amount you're spending. Delta G is a rise in that spending. So that shows you the rise. So we can see that if you're initially at this income with consumption, investment, and this level of government spending, and then the government says, well, let's raise to this level of government spending. So this line goes up by however much more they put in. Then the equilibrium moves from here to here, which means the equilibrium level of income and output in that economy moves from here to here, which is delta. This is called delta, the change in Y. So a change in G eventually leads to a change in Y. Okay, so obvious, but there's an important point to follow up, which is that there's no reason why this change in income should be the same as the change in government spending. And to try and show you this, if you were in class, I asked you to do this in class. If you can't be in class, because unfortunately the situation we have now precludes that, what I'd like you to do now is to pause the recording, repeat this by moving that line up, but first in a country where this line is quite flat, then in the same country where it's relatively steep, and try and move this line up by the same amount. So in each country, the government increases spending by exactly the same amount, just to see which country would get a bigger or smaller increase in output because of that. So pause the recording for a couple of minutes or however long it takes to sketch in those two lines, and then go to the next slide, and then start again when you go to the next slide. So I'll go there now. So if you're going to do this, pause now, because we go to the next slide. Okay, and here's the answer you should get. I've moved up the line by exactly the same amount because both governments put in the same amount of money. But you should be able to see that compared to this country, where that's the increase in income that you get, here, for the same money put in by the government, you get a much bigger rise in income. Why should it be? So the reason you're getting that is because of the slope of the line. So you need to know what affects the slope. if you knew what affected the slope of that line, you'd know why that one's bigger.
So next we will look in some more detail at how exactly that government spending is going to feed through into increased demand, using the crucial concept of the multiplier. But I'll save that for the next video because this one's getting a bit long. So for now, thanks for watching.